Yeah, Valeria. Um, I don't want to ask a question, how are you? I hear this question all the time these days, but honestly, although I do appreciate people checking in, I don't think that for Ukrainians this question is answerable anymore. Like, how do you even answer this question these days? So maybe I just ask you, how's your loved ones? Is everything okay, more or less?
Yeah, everything's more or less okay, I guess. As I said, I told you before, half of my family is in Kiev right now, in the outskirts of Kiev, and then half of my family is thankfully now all with me in the United Kingdom. They were privileged enough to have tourist visas, so they were able to make it here. But everyone else, so we're all in, some are in proper safety, some are in relative safety. But some of my relatives are unfortunately in Chernihiv, and that's a little bit more worrying. So can't really get much contact with them as there's no electricity and anything. So just fingers crossed that they're okay. How about you,
Yeah.
Maxim?
Oh, I think like all my family is there. I try not to share too much of information about where geographically, because some of the family end up on the Russian occupying part. But I don't think that many foreigners understand that for a lot of Ukrainians, especially those who live abroad, now taking care of your families in a war zone is a full-time second job. I mean, you spend literally hours every day sorting things out. Like my mom is on various medications. It's getting harder and harder every day to get them. So, for example, I spend hours hunting for them every morning, and then after lunchtime as well. Um, so I'm not complaining, of course. This is my obligation. I'm happy to do it. However, I also kind of encourage people, if you know Ukrainians, this is probably a lot of their everyday life now, doing that on top of what they are supposed to do. While we still have, people joining, and before I introduce our today's guest, and before we just lay some ground rules, I wanted to, if nobody minds, to just read out loud a viral post. It became viral in Ukrainian first, and now it's making a lot of rounds of, in English as well. It's a first-person account from Mariupol, and Mariupol is the epicenter of the slaughter that is happening in Ukraine, the epicenter of genocide that is happening in Ukraine. There is almost no connection. It's very hard to get any information from there, despite that over 200,000 people are still trapped there. So this post, kind of gets on Facebook from one of a person who's still there. And Hromadske International, where I was a co-founder, did a good translation. It's not long, but I really want to read it out loud. So the person name is Nadia Sukharokova, and she's from Mariupol. So that's what she says. I go outside in between the bombings. I need to walk the dog. She's whining, shivering, and hiding behind my legs. I want to sleep all the time. My yard, surrounded by high-rise buildings, is silent and dead. I'm not afraid to look around anymore. In front of me, the entrance to building number 105. It is burning now. The flames already devoured 5 floors and are slowly chewing the 6th. The fire in the room burns as delicately as in a fireplace. Black charred windows are windowless. Curtains turned by the fire fall out of them like tongues. Calm and doomed, I look at it. I'm sure I will die soon. It's a matter of a few days. In this city, everyone is constantly waiting for death. I just want it not to be too scary. 3 days ago, a friend of older nephew came to us and told us that there was a direct hit in the fire department. Rescuers died. One woman got her arm, leg, and head torn off. I dream that my body parts will remain in place even after the area bombing explosion. I don't know why, but I think it's important. Although they won't bury me during hostilities. That's what the police told us when we asked what to do with our friend's dead grandmother. They advised us to put her on the balcony. I wonder how many balconies have dead bodies on them. Our home in Mira Avenue is the only one without direct hits. It was hit twice by a shell. In some apartments, windows were blown out, but it did not suffer much compared to the other homes. The whole yard is covered with layers of ash, glass, plastic, and metal fragments. I try not to look at the iron thing that flew into the playground. I think it's a rocket or maybe a landmine. I don't care. It's just unpleasant. I see someone's face in third floor window and I shudder. It turns out that I'm afraid of living people. My dog starts howling and I realize that they're going to shoot again. I'm standing outside in the daytime and the cemetery silence all around me. There are no cars, no voices, no children, no grandmothers on the benches. Even the wind is dead. So yeah, quite triggering thing because, it goes around viral. You can check on my Twitter profile, English translation. But every time I look something from Mariupol, it's very triggering because I grew up in the same part of Ukraine. This all looks like my home yard, and I cannot stop thinking that my parents can end up in a similar, situation, in a similar backyard, in a similar mass grave. So this is quite, gruesome. But I thought that's important to share.
Thank you so much, Maxim, for that. It must have been hard to read out as well as I'm sure it's hard for many of us to listen as well.
Fuck yeah, I'm shivering. I am really, although I read it like many times today, but this is too close to home. But people should know it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Look, maybe we share some ground rules and continue with our guest today.
Absolutely. I'll be fast so that we can jump straight into speaking to our guest of today. But just to lay down some principles for our session, as you know, we had first session last week and we had a bit more thinking about what kind of space we want to create here. And Maxim and I had a chat, so I'm just going to take us through 3 key principles that I'd like everyone to keep in mind. Well, first of all, we want more of the conversations around Ukraine to involve actual Ukrainians. This is also a space for coming together in solidarity. So here, just our general principles for the discussion to help us focus on what we have in common and manage any differences that may emerge with respect and tolerance. So first is solidarity. This is a space to talk about Ukraine, but we as Ukrainians just want to acknowledge that there are other conflicts, wars, and situations of repression in the world which are not receiving the same attention. We stand in solidarity with them and with everyone affected. 2 is lived experiences. We're trying to find the right words to describe to the world how we are feeling, and the situation changes from day to day, but every situation is different. So we will try to avoid making direct comparisons to other places and contexts. We just believe in people being able to name their own experiences the way that they want to. But having said that, we're very open to hearing from you should you have any feedback. And please note that for many of us, including myself, English is not our first language. And so we are trying as hard as we can. And then finally, respect and tolerance. Please respect people who are different, particularly those from vulnerable or marginalized backgrounds. And please also be tolerant of people who you disagree with. We will always try to remember that other people may be suffering trauma, whether from this situation or from another that triggers previous trauma. Thank you so much for that. And I hope it sets a good stage for us to take this forward, Maxim.
Yeah, that's very solid, cool ground rules. At the Ukrainian Spaces, we amplify Ukrainian voices and we decolonize Ukraine conversations on Twitter. We see millions of Ukrainians with perfect English sharing their stories across all social media platforms, yet the conversations about Ukraine are still dominated by Western, mostly white, mostly male, folks. And not only it continuously robs Ukrainians of their agency, it also perpetuates outdated, misleading, and false narratives about Ukraine and Ukrainians. So we want to foster a relaxed, safe, and chill space for Ukrainian voices to express themselves without the need of fitting Western boxes, and the rest can use the space to educate themselves and to decolonize their views of Ukrainians. So we'll talk to our today's guest on the topic of being Ukrainian, what it means, explained by Ukrainians, and after that we'll have a small Q&A. You're free to ask your questions by raising your hand. Ukrainians will be prioritized. No offense, folks, but everyone is free to ask their questions for sure. And Ukrainians are free to share their experiences as well, apart from their questions. Oleksandr Shyn is with us today. He is one of my most favorite Ukrainians on Twitter recently. And I really wanted for him to join our spaces to talk about what it means to be Ukrainian, because I really feel like our journey with him to become Ukrainian was quite similar in some respects. Oleksandr, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for introducing me. I'm really happy to be here.
We're also with Val very excited to have you as well. Look, first, tell me what's your most preferable way of calling you by name, your name. Is it Oleksandr? Is it Sasha? Is it something else?
My full name is Oleksandr Shyn, so it's a Ukrainian name and Korean last name. Normally people call me Oleg, O-L-E-K, Oleg, not to be too formal. Yeah.
Okay, Oleg. Look, we don't ask how you are, but
right.
How's your loved ones? Is everyone safe? And please feel share to as much information as you feel secure to share, because it's a bit complicated.
Right. Well, my entire family's. I'm in Taipei, Taiwan, but my entire family is in southern Ukraine. They're currently in temporary occupation. Somehow I still cannot really comprehend the meaning of these words, to be honest, that my family is in occupation. But I mean, if we just look at how things are, they're physically safe. I would say they are in much more safety than, people in cities like Mariupol for sure, or Kharkiv, or those that are being fought for, besieged cities. The area where we live got occupied very quickly, very soon, and without much fighting, because it's also quite a rural area, And I think that the most horrible part of it was shelling in the beginning, because I was on phone with my parents on the first day of the full-scale invasion, and I could hear through the phone these horrible sounds. And by the end of the first day, it was quiet again. So I kind of got relieved. And my family is quite resilient. It seems like they're actually stronger than me. I don't know, because I was panicking for the whole week. I was still unsure what are the implications, right? I mean, I still am not, but they're in physical safety and they're trying to live their lives as normal as much as it's possible. But, mentally, it's very pressing for them and for me. And I think uncertainty is the most horrible thing about it. Don't really know what's going to happen next. There's no police access for the Ukrainian police. And we're just basically sitting and waiting for what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I can I can totally relate. I think I still remember the first time I heard explosions on the other side of, the other line with my parents.
Yeah.
And it's something that I probably will never forget. And I think it's a bit unsettling when you cannot do anything, right? So you're so far away. What you can do if suddenly connection stops, which thanks God, internet
Yeah.
still works even for families that got apart from Mariupol that got trapped on the occupied territories. But yeah, of course. Oleg, can you tell a bit about yourself in general for everyone else joining us?
Yeah, sure. I can see there's a lot of people here. It's a lot of attention. Um, I'm Korean-Ukrainian, basically, and I was not born in Ukraine, but I lived in Ukraine since I was 1 year old. So I don't really have much experience, but being, a resident of Ukraine and all my childhood. And then when I was about 17, I left. I went to South Korea for my studies. Yeah, and well,
What do you do
know.
now in
Yeah,
Taiwan? What do you do now in Taiwan?
I came to Taiwan in October because I did my master's degree in Europe, and then I decided to come to Taiwan because I've been here like 4 times before, and I really love this country. So I came here in October to find a job, and I'm still looking. And in October when I came here, my parents were trying to like convince me not to come here because at that time China was doing something, and it really seemed like Taiwan was a more dangerous place to be than in Ukraine at the time. And this happened then. So currently that's my status here.
Could I just quickly jump in? And I'm so glad to meet you. I was telling, Maxim and I met as well over Twitter, and I'm meeting so many fellow Ukrainians over Twitter, and it's just amazing to talk to all of you in semi-person over the internet. But I wanted to ask you something that I was asked a couple of days ago, and I would be really keen to hear what you think. What does Ukraine mean to you, and what does it represent to you? What sort of, what are we fighting for? What are the values that really express how you feel about Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. I think since the war started, I was asked this question many times. Maybe because I'm visually, I don't look like most Ukrainians. And yeah, people get curious about my ethnicity and get curious about what is that Ukraine is for me, even though I'm Korean-Ukrainian and I lived in Korea and now in Taiwan. It's all emotional, of course, the attachment, the land, I think as many Ukrainians, I really didn't realize what it really means to me until this war started, because I just treated it as given that I'm Ukrainian, so yes, I'm from Ukraine and my home is there, and I would go there and live the experiences and not really reflecting on it. What is it being Ukrainian, But now whenever I see a photo of a field or Kherson steppes, everything that clicks, it really saddens me, and I really feel like I will try to go back as soon as I can, and I just want to be there as much as I can, in that land with these people, with my family, but also just in every corner of this big country. Something I think that I really want to rediscover and appreciate for myself. Obviously people are curious, because I'm Asian Ukrainian, so they ask me about racism in Ukraine. And they'd be like, so is there racism in Ukraine? This simple question. And I mean, it's obvious. Of course, there's racism in Ukraine. There's racism everywhere. The very fact that we, right now, instead of doing that, we're fighting in this war, I think it's the most horrible part of it. And sometimes when I do think about my experience as a Ukrainian, I guess that's something that really pains me, because obviously I'm not there physically fighting, right? And something that pains me as an overseas Ukrainian is that there's so many things in Ukraine that need to be working on and need to be fought for. Our society is not perfect, right? It's not that perfect, open society that we want to see. And our government has, well, there's a lot of things to work on. But at least we have those tools to have that fight, right? We have the tools that are given to us by the system that the Ukrainians have been fighting for, including the Revolution of Dignity. It gave us these tools to be able to demand for more. And this fight is ongoing about racism and homophobia and sexism and many other things. But right now, instead of continuing those fights, we are fighting for such basic thing as that underlines, those very tools that we have. Because if Russia, God forbid, occupies Ukraine, we won't have that basic stuff. We will just lose all the achievements, all the freedoms that we have will be thrown back by so many years. And this fight that we had is, I don't know, it's going to go in a totally different direction. Yeah, exactly.
Priorities, absolutely. I often, when I often speak about what is happening with other foreigners, and especially those foreigners who are not sold on solidarity with Ukraine, or those foreigners who try to, drag us into some both-sidism conversations about why, other conflicts or other tragedies do not get as much attention as Ukraine, and so on. And when we disagree, people often say, especially Westerners, so we understand, in patronizing way, we understand that you're emotional. and my response is always, of course I'm emotional, but for the first time in my life, when I say something on high emotions and then the high emotions recede, I'm never ashamed of what I said, because for the first time in my life, when I say something about Ukraine, it comes from very extremely solid ground. I see black and white. It's not a gray situation. And this is something that, absolutely remarkable for me. I've never experienced that in my whole entire life before. When I speak about something out of convictions, I feel kind of like a certain power, empowering me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Look, I wanted to ask you about something that we chatted about before, and you mentioned, and feel free to, open up on it as comfortably as you would like. But we talked about Ukrainian being more of a, it's not about ethnicity, but more of a political nation or a nation of choice. And myself, I'm not ethnically Ukrainian much, but I know at some point in my life, I choose to become Ukrainian. I choose to be Ukrainian because I'm partially Georgian and Romani, and Polish and whatnot, and Russian speaking. But at some point, I made this clear decision that I am Ukrainian because the values that Ukraine represents for me are just, speaking to me. So was it similar to you in some ways, this journey?
I think to a large extent it was. I grew up and, well, I know this experience is shared by many Korean-Ukrainian kids. Many of us, we just grow up sure that we are Koreans, and it has nothing to do with South Korea or North Korea even. We just know that we are Koreans. ever since, we're kids. And I guess, well, somehow the Soviet culture enabled it, this system where there's all ethnicities working for the same communist goals, whatever. And I really never thought about being anything else, but except for Korean, until I went to Korea, South Korea, the only Korea that you can actually go and try to relate to. So I did. And I went there, and then in 2014, just 1 year after I went there, the Revolution of Dignity started. And that changed my life in the way I see myself, in the way I see Korea, and in the way I see Ukraine. I started seeing my passport as something else, and it's totally changed. I've realized that, as members of ethnic minority, we might grow up with some kind of doubts about who we are, and I think it's inevitable for many kids, especially in teenagers, to doubt and try to find something else. But after the Revolution of Dignity, I think it was very clear for me that there's this affiliation that really puts a lot of responsibility on me, And then when we started speaking up for what's happening, and this war is, it's pretty much common sense that war is bad. But with the Revolution of Dignity, Russian narratives were so strong that capturing support in Korea for Ukraine was quite hard, And I remember me and other Ukrainians, we were gathering in these groups, and we created a student community that was meant to include Ukrainian community and South Koreans, to kind of show them what Ukraine is, from culture and history and basic stuff, to what is happening right now in Crimea or in Donbas area. And I think that's when me and other Korean Ukrainians who live in Korea, because there's a lot of us who went back to Korea, and as members of that Ukrainian community in Korea, we really started to we changed. I can see that we changed. We started talking about Ukraine so much more, and we started discussing the Ukrainian needs a lot. What is that Ukraine needs right now, Because, in peaceful times, you don't really think about these things. But in times as horrible as this, you really, I guess, become most responsible. And, basically just caring so much about how we just represent, how we voice, how we, sometimes correct others passive aggressively about, when they say something that's out of Russian TV.
Right.
I think that really changed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And, sometimes I was thinking the other day, I was like, I regretted so much the times in my life that I've been sitting talking in a group of people, and someone said something that repeated some of these bizarre myths that are being peddled by Kremlin directly or indirectly in their consciousness, and I just didn't call them out on it. And now I'm sitting and I'm like, I really wish I did. So I totally understand that it's almost like it's now our moral obligation, right, to be calling things out, representing Ukraine, talking about who we are, and so on and so forth. And I just quickly wanted to say that I think something you said was so important around, all the work that the activism community in Ukraine has been doing over the years, since 2014, since the revolution and beyond that, and it's just, some of the thoughts I've been having whilst you were talking as well was it's sort of a shame because we've made so much progress, both in terms of women's rights and LGBTI rights and various other parts of, Ukraine's civil society. Like, we've been working so much on it, and now it's just like we need to pause and really focus on one thing, and then we'll go back to everything else. But I think
exactly.
it's also just I think it's just so important for everyone to keep that in mind. So I'm really grateful that you shared this with everyone. But also just to say that, one of the reasons that I personally believe Putin is so petrified of Ukraine is because we showed the world and the people in Russia and around Russia that there is a different way to the way that people have been living. There is a way that is more free. There is a way that is more accepting. There is a way that is more inclusive. And he's scared because people will see the alternative that Ukraine is showing them to freedom, to equality, to human rights, to various things. And he doesn't want to he wants to make sure that we're, removed from the face of the earth, because that's a massive threat to him. And so whenever we talk about this, just to put that into perspective, people need to really think about it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, guys, I think it's also important to acknowledge that personally, we're also in some sort of anti-colonial awakening. I mean, it's not only about Putin. Ukraine has been a long-term colony of Russia for many centuries. And for example, the way my people ended up in Ukraine, it was all uprooted through colonialism. And this is not the land where my people originally come from. Neither is Olex, right? So for us to kind of figuring out our roots took time, and especially since the time I remember, Russia spent enormous amount of time and resources trying to erase our past and trying to dominate the conversation about our identities, what it means. Because for them, it's a threat. When a colony starts to, figuring out who they are, what their history is about, learning about genocides and other horrible shit that they've been done to them, that's where the empire starts cracking. And I think this is what is happening in the moment. And that's why Russia is so scared and would rather eliminate Ukraine from the face of the earth than allow it to, expose the colonial nature of Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're obviously threatened by this.
I wanted to just quote quickly, there is another Ukrainian on Twitter, Sergei Mahov, and I think we're friends together with you, Oleg, with him. And he wrote a very cool post about Ukrainians being a political nation. He says, please understand how this works. And again, I love this so much because I want it to be repeated for billionth time for foreigners. Zelensky is Ukrainian, also ethnically Jewish. My dad is ethnically Russian. My mom is ethnically half Russian, but I'm Ukrainian. Crimean Tatars are Ukrainian. Most of them are Muslim. It doesn't matter. When you hear about Ukrainian nationalism, no, it's about the struggle for Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, not about race or blood or anything like that. It's in Russia, though, which is why Russian nationalists are all about imperialism and white Russian supremacy. In fact, there are two words in Russian that get lost in translation. Ruski, ethnic Russian, white, and Россиянин, citizen of Russia. There is no such thing in Ukraine. If you're a citizen of Ukraine, you are Ukrainian, period. I think it's very powerful stuff, right, guys?
100%.
Yes, it is. I actually made a thread with this. I just wanted people to see this as much as possible.
It's this talk about ethnicity. I always get perplexed about it all the time. Of course, sometimes it matters, especially because we have overlapping identities. But Ukraine has over 100 ethnicities, and it's so diverse. But I don't want to talk too much about that diversity or ethnicity.
Yeah, regarding ethnicity, I'll just add one thought that I had really reading this post is, clearly Russia is ethnically more diverse, right? They have 20 some republics there, and many more like ethnic communities across Russia. But the system that they've built is so, it might not be as destructive at this moment because they're not doing deportations in Russia anymore, or like very straightforward repressions. But in long term, this is just pretty close to what Soviet Union was doing before. The policies that they have right now, like, for example, setting Russian language as the main primary language in a certain republic, or canceling schooling, and then closing libraries. All this, it just leads to the same results that they wanted to achieve in the Soviet Union, was to kind of wipe everyone out, more like their identities out, erase their languages, make them forget their memories, so that everyone is compliant with this oppressive system, and no one ever remembers that they, came from somewhere else, which is what I really do not want to happen in Ukraine. Because if this ever happens to Ukraine, I think, I don't know how I would be able to, to live. If you tell me that Ukraine has to play by these rules, the freedoms that Ukraine guarantees to us is something that's really valuable, I think. And I never really appreciated, until the possibility of this not being so appeared. Yeah, that's just one thing I wanted to say.
This is so powerful. This is so powerful because, we were growing up. It took us years to figure out who we are because so much history has been erased. I don't think that many people outside understand what it's like when you grow up and you don't know what language to speak, who you are, what's your history.
Exactly.
This is so fucked up. And it's been like that for many generations before us as well. And that's why we're fighting so hard. We've started figuring out who we are, and there is no fucking way we go back.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes like a couple of years ago when I was back home with my dad, and we were talking about the Soviet-Korean history, So there was a major deportation in 1937 that brought so many Koreans from Russian empires, Far East, to Central Asia, where they used to deport everyone to Central Asia. And talking to my dad, I realized how little was passed down about this history. You can see that there was obviously a filter, this filter imposed by Soviet government, imposed by this Russian majority, that disabled my grandparents from speaking about that experience. My grandparents are the main generation that could tell me what happened during those deportations, and they never did because they were discouraged to speak about it, and we were discouraged to ask about it. And once I just turned on my phone to just the recorder to just record what my dad has to say, and I tried to grab every freaking word, because I realized that if I don't ask him, if I don't record this, I really don't have any other source. And this is more important than what you can read on Wikipedia about those events. And that really struck me how while I have the ability to, also collect this information, and then someday I might write about it or publish it in Ukraine. In Russia, they even discourage you from calling that deportation. They use the word переселение. Переселение is kind of like it could be a resettlement, but it could also mean migration. So it doesn't necessarily imply that it's forced, you know. And this way, they're just erasing this very important words and tools that, you know, we need to construct our memory. Same thing that they do around the Holodomor genocide of the Ukrainian people in 1932-33. They reject those very basic terms, basic concepts that we need to be able to tell the world. And I mean, they used to at least dominate, you know, global perception of Ukraine. And what you say about colonialism, I feel like I've never talked about colonialism as much as I do these days in the context of Ukraine.
Right. Yeah. Please do. Please do.
Yeah.
Bella, I know you.
First of all, I just wanted to say that, Oleg, thank you for sharing this, because I think this session today and you sharing your experience today with us is the reason that Maxim and I have started this space for Ukrainian voices, because it's just so incredible to hear these stories about your family, your experience, what it means for you to be Ukrainian from you. And I hope that we'll see you again here. Obviously, we're not yet ending yet, but I'm just saying, I was telling Maxim that, you know, your story and what you're saying, and it's just bringing sort of tears to my eyes listening to our love for Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you now, a part of what we are also here for, and this is a little moment of I guess therapy for us, is to also try and talk to our Western friends and colleagues about what we would like them to do differently. And a question that Maxim and I ask to people is, you know, there's been a lot of media coverage, Western media coverage over the past couple of weeks of Ukraine on an unprecedented level, something that has never happened before. But what has annoyed you in Western media coverage, and what would you recommend they do differently moving forward?
A lot of things. a lot of things. And I'm not even, you know, I don't even read Western media that much. My life is mostly, you know, it's between Ukraine and Asia. But I can see how, and which is the reason I wanted to thank you so much. I can see how many people and many media fail to prioritize Ukrainian voices, which is why I really appreciate that you've created this platform so that Ukrainians could speak. Because I think it's only unfair when someone else is trying to define us, trying to tell what is this Ukraine. And well, one of the narratives that really honestly pisses me off is NATO versus Russia discussion. When this very intelligent and distinguished people start digging into the analytics about how what is happening in Ukraine is the result of, you know, a failed balance of power or whatever, the politics between NATO. I don't know, some say NATO provoked, others say Russia's the one who provoked. But I mean, we are a nation of 40 million people. 40 million people. If you reduce this whole conflict to just simple geopolitics between East and West, you kind of like deny these 40 million people the fight that we've had all these years. It's not just about NATO and Russia. It's about the fight that we've had against Russia for centuries, right? It's something that will persist after Putin is gone. It's something that will still be there after NATO's dissolved. And we'll still be fighting this, whether Russia is a liberal democracy or whether it remains the same dictatorship after the next guy, whoever comes after Putin. We'll still be having this conversation will still be explaining to the world what is wrong with this calling us brothers, what is wrong with this whole situation when they try to treat this centuries-long abusive relations with diplomacy. What is wrong with calling us out on a debate, with Russians trying to establish whose truth is this?
Yeah,
I feel like, just
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, go
just look at Ukrainians and give them a microphone and they will just tell you everything.
ahead.
But we haven't had the resources or platform or time to do this, right? And
Yeah,
now
I
just
think that
energy.
I think if they listened to Ukrainians, at least in the last 8 years, this wouldn't be happening. And you're
Exactly.
absolutely right. If the conversations were dominated or were including Ukrainians, we wouldn't be facing this situation in the first place. But absolutely, yes, everything that you said, this was happening to Ukraine in the last 350 years. It didn't start with Putin. It will not end with Putin until in Russia they face the reality and they accept responsibility for decades and hundreds of years of colonization, looting our lands, and so on.
Exactly.
Look, I want to open it for questions and comments from Ukrainians as well, but questions from everyone. So please, if you'd like to ask a question, or if you're Ukrainian and want to share something, just raise your hand. I see some friends here. I really want to encourage also to participate. I see Tatiana. 1 second, Tatiana. Tatiana, you're on mute. So
добрий вечір, добрий день всі.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava, heroim slava. I have been listening and seeing so many people come together from around the world who are Ukrainians. And I'm in New York, and my family is from Sinovidne, which is Ivano-Frankivsky Oblast. And what the most important narrative, and I keep trying to say, and a lot of Ukrainians are now agreeing kind of amongst each other, is that especially Western media, they love a war story. They love the narrative of the guns and the tanks and, how Ukraine is being decimated. But the most important long game in what I've seen, what my parents have held on to, because they fled during the war in Ukraine, and they have memories of being arrested and guns pointed at them by Russian officers. And what they remember, the things that they took with them are shavashivane, or the rizblanya, the wood carvings, and they talk about music and food. And this is how we can make a bigger impact, on the world. And I love that there are so many Ukrainians that are so passionate about delivering this message. And I think, this is nothing new for us. And I think that the world is now realizing that, we have lived with this kind of conflict for generations. It has affected us in our bones. And to be able to stand there and say, no, we are not going to leave. We're going to fight to make sure that our country is seen as glorious and beautiful and majestic, no matter what. It's so exhausting, but it's the most important message. And I just wanted to share that I'm so proud to be connected to so many of you now. And I'm seeing Trezub and Sinojote Prapor, like everyone is covering themselves with the kind of message that Ukrainians want, which ultimately is to live in sovereignty and in peace, and I just wanted to share that because I'm so proud, even though I haven't met so many of you, that I'm, nasha mova peremoże, nasha dusha peremoże. We can stand proud and say that we are more than this moment.
Yeah, дякую, Tatiana. Thank you so much. I think everyone is agree. I also kind of realizing that not without being corny, although I'm super corny all the time. That's nothing new. But without being corny, I think the fact that so many people respond these days to our calls, and again, I remember clearly 2014 when I was on the Maidan Square and I was trying and screaming and, trying to do my best to get the global attention, and it was extremely hard. This time around is easier, exactly because our message is not about ethnicity or geography, about country, but about core values of humanity.
Exactly.
We're on the light side of the side of light, as we like to say in Ukraine these days, and the other side and the side of darkness, and it has never been clear. That's why people respond.
Exactly. And it's such a this conflict is this displacement, these refugees. It's not just us. It is such a universal, sadly, a universal truth in so many cultures who have experienced this. And I think that is the thread that ties all of us together, which is why the world is leaning in, going, actually, in my family and in this family and in that person's family, these stories resonate in a much bigger way. And I love that Ukrainians are I mean, it's upsetting, and I cry every other day, and it's just, but at the same time, I'm proud that Ukrainians are leading this message of humanity. And I love that we now have a leader who knows exactly what the media and the people need. He knows how to present who we are and what we are fighting for, which is an extraordinary thing. He's not a 65-year-old dusty politician. He is one of us. He is the future.
Yeah, isn't it super cool that now two of the most prominent leaders in Ukrainian liberation war are a Jewish-Ukrainian and a Korean-Ukrainian, which is governor of Mykolaiv region.
Exactly. And I love this. I said this on a radio interview the other day. I said it's no coincidence that Volodymyr, the Mir is in his name, the peace is in his name. Like he is leading. He is our peacemaker. All of these leaders within Ukraine who are doing this are showing that they are the world leaders right now.
Yeah.
And what's going back to our conversations around activism times, like it's just so funny to see how, not funny, but it's actually quite inspiring to see how we all, we were a month ago for Women's March Ukraine, we were like petitioning him to sign the Istanbul Convention, and I'm sure Maxim and Oleg can tell you about other things that they've been doing from their sides to ask the president to change things within Ukraine. But it's just so amazing, disregarding all our differences and the work that we've done before, how like we've really connected and united under one person who's been able to take us through this sort of terrible time for all of us. So I totally agree.
Oleg, I'm super grateful. I hope you can come back to the same Ukrainian spaces and chat with us more. It's very therapeutic.
Yes, for sure.
Hearing your voice, your stories, I feel so much better after this shitty day. Thank you.
Thank you both for this space. Yeah.
And let's keep in touch.
Yep.
Yes, for sure. And everyone else.
If everyone else, please use the hashtag Ukrainian Spaces to keep the conversation going in between actual spaces. Suggest people you want to hear, suggest topics you want to hear, or just express yourself as Ukrainians or Ukrainian allies. And we're happy then to pick up those conversations in real life. But for now, super grateful to Oleg, even super grateful to Val.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Слава.